All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 2 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we'll cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until midnight, right here on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. Now, if you'd like to send me an email, if you have any questions, if there's a special guest you'd like us to get on the show, my email address is xzone@classic1220.ca. My first guest tonight, X Zone Nation, is David Marler, and he is the director of the National UFO Historical Records Center. And let me see, David has had a lifelong interest in UFO subject and has been actively investigated and researched the subject for over 34 years. He joined the Mutual UFO Network, that's MUFON, in 1960. He later served as the MUFON Illinois State Director. During his tenure with MUFON, he had conducted numerous investigations into alleged UFO sightings and related experiences. Today, he is an independent researcher. And if you'd like more information on David, check out his website at www.nufohrc.org. And David Marler, welcome to the X Zone.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be here.
So, David, tell us about some of your experiences as an investigator of UFOs, and what led you to the the great work that you people are doing at the National UFO Historical Records Center.
Well, it really starts when I was growing up in the 1970s. My father had an interest in the UFO subject, nothing to the degree that mine has evolved into, but he always raised me to be very open-minded, but very skeptical, walking that fine line. Open-minded, but not to the point where your brains are falling out of your head. And so he very early on kind of indoctrinated me into the subject of UFOs and other paranormal topics. But it was really UFOs that stuck with me. And in 1973, there was a UFO flap in an area called Piedmont, Missouri.
Oh, yeah.
And my father originated from that area. And so he knew a lot of the people there. His aunt and uncle lived there. And in fact, Rob, the initial primary witness was his best friend growing up, whose name was Reggie Bone, who was the basketball coach in Piedmont, Missouri. And so I grew up hearing about that when that was occurring, and then in subsequent years, my dad would reflect back on that. And 4 years later after that, my sister had a close encounter with a UFO, some type of aircraft, vehicle, whatever word you want to use, was directly over her car, her and her husband, who were driving home late one night just before midnight in Missouri. And it terrified, the heck out of them. To this day, when she describes the event, you can still see goosebumps on her arm. That's the indelible impression that it left with her. And I always like to remark, Rob, that my sister never drank, never did drugs, and I love her to death, but she's one of the most unimaginative people you could ever meet. So she's not exactly the type of person to hoax or perpetrate a lie. And so I experienced that through, virtue of hearing her and her husband relay the story in many, many years at holiday gatherings. And then in 1978, another event happened very close to where I lived at the time in St. Louis, Missouri. An area called Ellsbury, Missouri, experienced a UFO flap where there were UFO sightings and, in this particular case, cattle mutilations that were occurring. And both Piedmont and Ellsbury garnered a lot of local St. Louis media attention, newspaper, television, etc. And again, Rob, there was really no one moment, no aha moment where UFOs clicked in my head.
Right.
As I like to say, growing up in the 70s, it was just this gradual kind of evolution, seeing these things, hearing about these things, my father's influence. And so in 1990, I became involved in MUFON at the time. I thought, well, rather than just having a curbside interest, I want to get involved. I'd like to talk to people that claim to have seen UFOs and go out and actually investigate. And then that evolved over time. And really, starting in 1990, I started amassing a UFO library. Now, when I say that, back then, I was referring to a bookcase in my living room. It has now evolved into the largest historical collection in the country. And we thought we'd put a face and a name to it. And when I say we, the collective we, myself and all of the leading historians and archivists here in the United States, Jan Aldridge, Barry Greenwood, Mark Rodiger, just to name a few.
Sounds like our guest list.
And so, yes. And so these gentlemen had been collecting and researching the subject decades before I came along. But they are getting to a point where, in age, where they have to find a succession plan. What's going to happen to their collections, all of this historical material that they've gathered? And they have some of quite literally, the largest collections in the United States. So we decided to, develop this into the National UFO Historical Records Center. Material has been transitioned here in the last few years, bit by bit, although we've had some large collections coming in, which hopefully we'll talk about later in the show. But we have case files, we have audio recordings, microfilm, newspapers, news clippings, all types of correspondence from some large names. In fact, we just received a collection recently. We have original signed letters from Dr. Carl Jung, the father of Jungian psychology.
And what did Dr. Jung say about UFOs?
Well, it's interesting. He was misquoted back in the 1950s saying that he believed in the reality of the subject. He did believe there was something to it, but when you really look at his statements, and in the letters that we have, he actually clarifies it. He viewed it as real in the sense that it was a manifestation that people were experiencing. But he states in the letters that we have, I am not qualified to judge this as an objective reality in the sense that I am not a physicist. I am interested in the psychical aspects as a psychologist in how it impacts and how these experiences are generated within the actual individual and within their mind. He didn't negate the reality, the objective reality of UFOs, but he, I think rightly so, conceded, I'm not a physicist. I will leave that to the physicist. I'm a psychologist and I'll stay in my lane.
What is your opinion, or what do you think UFOs are?
Well, I've stated many times that, I've been doing this 34 years. I wouldn't chase this if I didn't feel that there was truly an objective reality behind some of the reports. And that's really where we get into the weeds, right, where the work is. You have misidentifications quite often of conventional objects and celestial objects that people report as UFOs. I'm not interested in those. Certainly, we have to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. Yeah. I can't tell you, Rob, how many times I've interviewed people and they swear up and down they saw a UFO and it was this, that, the other thing. And when I'm on location with them and they're pointing to the area in the sky, it turns out that what they were looking at was Venus or something very conventional. However, equally so, I've interviewed a lot of law enforcement officers and other qualified individuals over the years, including pilots, who have described extremely highly anomalous things. Let's just say that. I don't go off on the record and say, UFOs are extraterrestrial. I don't know what they are. Yeah. But to answer your question, where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's a hell of a lot of smoke with this UFO subject. And I was just remarking to a friend the other day, ironically enough, from Canada. I stated that it's not that I can summarily believe all of this UFO information and UFO narratives, but equally so, as an educated, objective, rational individual, I can't summarily discount all of the testimony.
What was your opinion of the congressional hearings held not too long ago?
I thought it was interesting, one, that we're having them. I think, Rob, you'll agree that, the fact that we're having this discussion in the hallowed halls of Congress where we're finally addressing the subject rather than, as you know, decades worth of denials on the
Yes.
part of the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm.
We're certainly experiencing a sea change moment right now with the UFO subject as it relates to the U.S. government. Why we're doing that right now, where is it going? I don't have those answers, but I thought it was interesting. I actually have somewhat of a difference of opinion, though, with a lot of individuals. You had David Fravor and Ryan Graves, who were Navy pilots, that described their UFO sightings that they and their fellow wingmen had experienced when they were in the Navy.
Tic Tacs.
And then you and then you had David Grush.
Right.
And David Grush began to discuss stories of crash saucers and dead aliens, what they called biologics. And I can't prove or disprove any of those narratives, but I felt it was sad because, unfortunately, because those claims were so sensational, and even though Grush is a very competent individual who has worked in geospatial intelligence with the NRO, they are still, and I mentioned this actually that very day later on Albuquerque TV News, they are just that, claims.
That's right.
We still need corroboration. We need someone to come forward that can back up his testimony, or we need government documents or physical evidence that can substantiate these stories. Because, Rob, you and I know we've heard these narratives of crash saucers, dead aliens going back to at least 1950.
Yes.
1947 with Roswell. Again, I can't say that it's not real, but I can't believe it outright without some type of evidence. But what I was going to say is, I felt sad for David Fravor and Ryan Graves because they had very compelling testimony, again, backed up by other individuals, backed up by radar in these instances. But unfortunately, once we start talking about crash saucers and dead aliens, it sucked all the oxygen out of the room. And that became the focus. And I think even though we're not talking dead aliens or crash saucers, I think the testimony by David Fravor and Ryan Graves was equally compelling, and I think that they should have focused on that as well.
I agree with you 100% because what I got from the hearings was it was all this hype. Finally, we were going to get a smoking gun. Finally, these three people were brought before Congress. I agree that the two Air Force pilots were compelling because they had seen. Their testimony was backed up, like you said, by radar. But then you had David Grush, who was all hearsay.
It is. And I think, again, I don't mean to disparage the man. He is who he says he is as far as his positions within the U.S. intelligence community. And Rob, I want to be very clear because sometimes I get a lot of slings and arrows for making critical comments and raising critical questions. He may be 100% correct in what he relayed verbally to Congress.
David, I hate to do this, but I've got to take my break. Please stand by.
Sure.
We'll come back to this. It's very interesting. Exonation, our guest this hour is David Marler. He is with the National UFO Historical Records Center, and their website is www. What's your website, David?
www.nufohrc.org.
And we'll both be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue here in the X Zone from our studios in St. Catharines, Ontario on Classic 1220. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. This is The X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. You're listening to us on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and stream.classic1220.ca. My guest this hour is David Marler. He is with the National UFO Historical Records Center. The website is www.nufohrc.org. Okay, we were talking about the congressional hearings and David Grush. I also found it very frustrating that any time he was asked a question by a member of Congress, that you would say, okay, here comes the answer. Well, no, he's not going to give the answer in public because he'll only do it in secure settings.
Yes. Yes. It was, you could almost characterize it, Rob, as a big tease in that sense. And admittedly, if what he's saying is true, we understand that. But I agree that it whetted the public's appetite, but it ultimately fell flat because, again, unless we see more traction, more development with the story, we're literally still basing all of the discussion that you see on social media and all the chatter on the internet based on the claims and statements that he made during that hearing. And we really have nothing more than that right now.
I found it very strange that weeks later, nothing. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody was carrying anything. The established media online, they were saying, what happened? Where did it all go? It was like,
Well,
here today,
yes.
gone tomorrow.
Well, and along that same line, Rob, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Sure.
During his testimony, he claimed that people had quite literally, and I'll put a fine point on it, have been murdered because they knew information about the UFO subject. And he alludes to the fact that elements of the United States government may have had a hand in that. Well, again, we've heard these stories. Conspiracy theorists have been circulating rumors and narratives like this for many, many years. 34 years of being involved in the subject, I've never seen any credible evidence to support that. None of my colleagues have died under mysterious circumstances. But, he throws that out there without mentioning any names. I mean, if someone's dead, why not say their name? I'll give you, 2 or 3 examples. This person died, this person died, this person died. I can't reveal classified information. All I would recommend is journalists look into those deaths. I don't see why he couldn't have done that. But even more so, if he's stating that the stakes are so high that the United States government are literally killing people to silence them regarding the UFO subject, here he is revealing all this testimony. If he believed that, and more importantly, if the congressional members of Congress that were listening to this testimony believed him, as some seem to have done, wouldn't you think, Rob, that the next thing would be, as soon as that meeting concluded, we need to establish protective custody for this witness? Because if what he says is true, he could be eliminated before we have a classified briefing in a skiff.
I agree.
But they didn't do that. They didn't do that.
No, they didn't. And what raises questions in a lot of people's minds is, here you have this member of the military, distinguished member, who's taken an oath of secrecy to defend his country and so on. And yet here he is violating his oath. And because he wants to become a whistleblower. How can you believe anything this man says?
Well, I completely agree with that. We're completely on the same wavelength. But I have seen over 30 plus years now a fundamental distrust. And again, I'm not saying it's not warranted when you look at history. A fundamental distrust within the United States with regard to its government. And one could argue in other countries that might be the case as well. And again, not saying it's not warranted, but looking at some of the things governments have done over the years and decades.
Tis true.
But what's interesting is people have a fundamental distrust of government and military, but as soon as a whistleblower comes out and tells you what you want to hear,
they believe it.
You abandon all skepticism and accept it at face value. And there are devout, I think I'm using the word appropriately, Rob, followers of David Grush now, because they want to believe so strongly that UFOs are real, that we've recovered crash disks and dead aliens. Here is someone that was on the inside that's validating our beliefs, confirming our belief system. And some of these people I've seen on social media, they're rabid. If you dare question anything about David Grush, it's almost like saying to a Christian, Jesus was not the Messiah. And that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks I've seen in the UFO community over the years. And we see it now in politics, unfortunately, in many arenas, where your belief is so strong that you have lost all objectivity.
But I believe this is where your organization, the National UFO Historical Research Center, will play a major part, David. Because for once in history, you have the documents, pro and con, available. And it's no more hearsay when it comes to what you people have.
And that's exactly the underpinnings of why we created the organization, Rob. One, because we are in this new era of credibility, as evidenced by the congressional hearing. But now NASA and the AIAA are now wading in. They're now looking at the UFO subject. Many new PhDs are starting to enter the arena from various universities around the globe. We felt that One, because we do have some of the largest historical data sets related to the field, which we'll hopefully talk about some of the most recent acquisitions during the show. But we felt like duty bound as the stewards of the history. To your point, let's educate the public on the history. Let's prove or demonstrate what is credible versus what is not. And it really comes down to the provenance of information. And I'll share a quick story with you.
Please.
One of the gentlemen, I won't mention his name because I don't want to call him out. He asked that I not share this publicly. I don't think it would be bad because I completely debunked the whole thing. But let me just say, someone who's been working on Capitol Hill on the UFO initiative was meeting with members of Congress. During a video call, they said that they had been presented with photos by one of the congressmen that they had received through a friend of top secret Air Force Project Blue Book UFO photos. Immediately, Rob, the hair on the back of my neck kind of stood on end because nothing within Project Blue Book was ever classified top secret. It was never classified top secret. Civilian researchers could go in, they would show you the files. There was nothing top secret, using the term literally, the classification. So immediately I was somewhat suspect. I'm like, okay, you've got my interest. So they said, look, I don't want you to share this because I told the congressman I wouldn't share it. But he goes, I want to get your thoughts on this. And he holds his phone up to the webcam. And it takes a while, as you can appreciate, for the webcam to focus. Now, mind you, I was on the call with Barry Greenwood, one of my fellow historians and board members of the National UFO Historic Record Center. We're looking and we're waiting for this image to come into focus. Finally, Rob, the UFO in the photo comes into stark clarity and in unison. And we couldn't have rehearsed it. We've joked several times about it since. This occurred, by the way, about a year and a half ago. They basically showed us the photo, and in unison, Barry and I say at the same time, those are the Paul Villa photos. And the phone is retracted from the webcam. The individual in question is white as a sheet. And he says, you've seen these photos? And my response was, yes. I said, those were a series of hoaxed photos, that being one of the best ones of the series, a series of hoaxed UFO photos by a UFO contactee by the name of Paul Villa. And I said, not only do I know about it, I have Dr. J. Allen Hynek's original file on it. We have the Blue Book file on it. I have the NICAP case file on it. And now, most recently, I have the APRO UFO case file on it. I said, I have all of the photos from the entire series that were taken. I said it was completely debunked very early on. And the individual had all kinds of wild claims. And I said, in fact, that exact photo, which you say is a top secret UFO Air Force photo, was on postcards that were mass manufactured back in the 60s and 70s with the caption, "See, UFOs are real." But the individual had their jaw on the table. They were presented with this information through a seemingly credible source, and they thought that this was legitimate. The individual told me we were going to pay thousands of dollars to have this digitally analyzed by a photo analyst. And I said, don't. I said, I'll send you all the information, which I did the very next day, Rob, all of the information I just described. And about a week later, I pinged the individual. I said, did you get all the information I sent? And his response was, I can't remember the exact words. Yeah, thank you. You saved my butt. And it just demonstrates you have to know your history, because if you don't know history, everything's new and everything is seemingly credible. But and the photos were taken just about 40 minutes from where I live here in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area.
But when you look at the entire UFO scenario, even to today, David, people don't take the time to look back into the history to see what is already there and to see what stories that are already there that have been debunked and
thoroughly debunked.
Right. And I can't understand why some of the congressmen were so ill-advised on the content of their topic, UFOs. They should have had people from the UFO community like yourself, Kevin Randall, and other established investigators who could explain to them what a UFO was, what the case was, how you proceed, and what is already out there and has been debunked. But these people in Congress, they have no idea.
You are echoing the sentiments that I shared with my friend Chris Mellon, who, of course, has been working in D.C. as well.
Yeah.
I informed Chris of that. I said, please use us as a resource.
Big time.
We're not here to get paid to advise Congress, but we would be happy to do so.
Mm-hmm.
We are centralizing all of the history and all of this information. And by the way, Chris is a huge supporter of what we're doing. But I, in fact, remarked to Chris after the congressional hearing that we're describing to your audience, I mentioned that the next time they have a hearing, if they have another hearing, my intent is, Rob, and I don't know if I'll be able to budge the needle, but I'm going to make an attempt. I'm going to fly to D.C. and at least try to be present during the hearings and possibly have some sidebar conversations with individuals in Congress and some of the advisors.
Well, I wish you luck, my friend. I really do. You and I have to take a break, so please stand by. And Exonation, our guest this hour is Chris Marler, and he is with the National UFO Historical Records Center. Their website, www.nufohrc.org. Tell me what you think, Exonation. Are you a believer? Are you a skeptic? How should we, the public, have the topic of UFOs addressed by our respective governments? Send me your email, exxon@classic1220.ca, and Chris and I will be back on the other side of this short break as we keep on asking questions, searching for answers, but demanding the truth. I'm Rob McConnell. This is The X Zone. You're listening to us on Classic 1220 and streaming around the world on classic1220.ca. We'll be right back after this very short break. Oh, and once again, my email address. Thank you, Craig, for reminding me. xzone@classic1220.ca.
Sun goes down on a silky day, quarter moon walking through the Milky Way. Oh, you and me, baby, we could think of something to do. It's the right time of the night.
And welcome back, everyone. David Marler is our special guest. He is with the National UFO Historical Records Center. Their website is www.nufohrc.org. First of all, David, thank you very much for joining us. Always a delight talking to people who actually take the time to check out the historical value of UFOs. And Kevin Randall said to say hello to you.
Oh, excellent. That's great. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for the work Kevin has done. I always found him to be a very credible voice in the sea of insanity at times in the UFO field.
The sea of insanity, isn't that the truth? Tell us more about your organization and some of the collections that you have there.
Absolutely. Before I do, you had mentioned to your audience, if you're a believer or a skeptic, I do want to clarify for the audience, our organization, the National UFO Historical Records Center, we were created because we want to preserve the history. That's really the cornerstone of what we're doing. And what I mean by that, Rob, whether you're a skeptic or a believer or somewhere in between, our attitude is whether you relegate the UFO subject to fact, fiction, or folklore, it's part of our history and it's part of our culture. So I just want to frame the discussion around that we're not here to make people believe. We don't care if you believe in UFOs, but if you're going to research, as you alluded to earlier, and do your homework, if you're writing a book that's skeptical, you still need to cite sources and information. If you're a believer and you want to write about the UFO subject, you need sources and information. That's what we do, is we want to be a central location that is preserving this material, but more importantly, making it available to the general public. And that's a large part of what we're doing, Rob. We're digitizing a lot of the material that's coming in with the intent to eventually have that available free to the worldwide community. And certainly we welcome the general public to come and visit, but also academics. And in fact, I was just talking to a producer in Canada just earlier this afternoon. And so again, if you're going to talk about the subject, you need to be able to draw these informational sources in. But as I alluded to before, most of my colleagues are now in their 70s and 80s, and they're at a point in time where they're asking themselves, what am I going to do with all the books, the journals, the newsletters? And a lot of this material goes back to 1947, original material. Um,
It's
you were talking
priceless.
about
Yeah.
it's priceless. That's how I'm a historian by nature. I love history in general, even beyond the framework of UFOs. So I have a passion about preserving history and ensuring that if we educate people on the history, it's accurate history. And there's a
Exactly.
lot of misinformation and disinformation on the internet, and we want to make sure that it's an accurate retelling based on original materials, as you were alluding to, Rob, not just information derived from the internet. And something else, too. We have a lot of original government documents through the acquisition of Dr. J. Allen Hynek's collection. In November of 2020, the Center for UFO Studies moved all of their files, which not only include the Center for UFO Studies case files, but also the earlier National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, or NICAP, which goes back to the late 1950s. But most recently, and I'm just so happy to be able to share this with you and your audience, we acquired what were considered the lost, air quotes around lost, the lost APRO files, Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization. This was the earliest well-organized UFO, civilian UFO investigative organization, and it was put together by Jim and Coral Lorenzen, a husband and wife team. And they created what really was a template for MUFON and all these other organizations that followed. They were really pioneers in creating a well-organized, international, I might add, international UFO research organization. We have a number of files and audio recordings, reel-to-reel audio recordings going back
My
to
gosh.
the late 1950s from a group called CAPRO, CAPRO, the Canadian equivalent of APRO. And so lots of international material, lots of material from South America, South American countries, specifically Brazil and Chile. And so it's an amazing treasure trove that allows you to not only go back in time to see what did people believe, what was being reported, but then being able to compare that to what is being reported today and what are the mindsets and the thoughts and the ideas involved with people that are interested in the subject. And as I've mentioned before, even if you're a skeptic, if you're a sociologist and you think that this is just a 20th century myth born out of the space age, great. Well, here's a lot of material that you can access to get insight into the zeitgeist of the time. What were people thinking? What were their philosophies? And so it's just a lot of material. But we also had some really bombshells. People think, well, it's all old material. It's all out there on the internet. We came across a report going through the APRO files, and I just want to give you an example in your audience, a concrete example of some of the bombshells that we come across. It had always been rumored that Jim and Coral had inside military contacts because they were civilian contractors that worked for a time here in New Mexico at Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Well, going through the files just literally a month or two ago, Rob, when we acquired them, I was going through and I found some original military reports, unclassified, I might add. Don't want to have the government knocking down my door, but unclassified reports. But these were unknown radar track reports. And this one in particular, it stated that there were 4 separate radar tracking stations that tracked an unknown object. They literally called it a UFO in the report that came in across the Mexican border into the United States. The object, and I have the plots, they actually had a handwritten drawing of the radar plots and where the radar stations were. This occurred, by the way, in New Mexico and the western part of Texas. They showed that this object had made 7 sharp angular maneuvers, but the handwritten notations by the individual from Kirtland Air Force Base right here in Albuquerque, where I'm doing the show from, he wrote, on the night of September 13th, an unknown object was picked up by radar about 120 miles below the international border in Mexico. Within 12 minutes, this object had crossed the border and disappeared some 200 miles inside the United States. This is the most important part. Speed was timed at 32 miles a minute, or an average of 1,920 miles per hour. Fastest speed was 2,445 miles per hour. It went on to state that they initially thought it might be radio interference, but due to the fact 4 separate radar tracking stations were tracking the exact same target at the exact same location, making the same angular turns at high velocity, they deemed that this was a genuine UFO.
Wow.
Now, the reason I say this is important,
Okay.
when you correlate this with the official Air Force Project Blue Book case files, there is no case file on this. So this may be quite literally the only original typewritten, handwritten account of this UFO incident. So it's not out there all on the internet. There are rare insights into this. In fact, another episode that occurred, and this shows you, as Barry Greenwood likes to say, how we're bringing puzzle pieces together. Barry always says, we're trying to connect the dots. We're bringing all these puzzle pieces together. I had Jan Aldridge here as another senior UFO historian on the subject, who I admire greatly. Jan, who's part of our organization, was here in the research room where I'm sitting right now, and he was going through just a miscellaneous, thick box, Rob, of miscellaneous papers, just oddball pages that had been thrown in this box over decades. And he pulls a page out and he goes, "This is interesting." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "These are original handwritten log sheets of UFO sightings at Vandenberg Air Force Base." And I stopped. Now, mind you, my back was to him. I was currently sitting where I am now, digitizing an old reel-to-reel tape from the 1950s. And I stopped. I took my headphones off. I said, "What?" I said, "Vandenberg Air Force Base." And he looked at me kind of quizzically. He goes, "Yeah, why?" I said, "What year?" He said, 1967. I said, "What month?" He goes, "October." And then I looked at him and I said, "What date?" And each question had much more severity in the tone of my voice. And he goes, "October 2nd, 1967. Why?" And I said, "I just literally 10 minutes ago digitized a reel recording of the radar operators at Vandenberg on October 2nd, 1967. And Rob, we brought the tape and the log sheets together. It was describing the same event."
How could events like this not be reported and not caught by the military and not caught by the media?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. In this particular instance, I went to the Condon Committee report, and they actually analyzed it and dismissed it as birds. But what's interesting is, if you're just to read the Condon report, you'd think, okay, birds, sure, birds and other, aerial clutter can cause radar, erroneous radar tracks. Sure. You hear the voice and you hear the tone of the voice of these radar operators, some of them saying, "I've never seen anything like that on a radar scope in my life." And then you listen to the fact that it was not just radar, it was radar visual. You hear the military personnel stating that they see lights on these objects. Well, the last time I checked, Rob, I didn't know of any any bird, at least here in North America, that had lights affixed to them. And so, again, you start bringing all of the data together, and I think you get the most well-rounded insight into some of these cases. Now, in some cases, in some instances with these cases, you might disprove it, debunk it. This was conventional in nature. But in the case of this Vandenberg incident, I think it forces you to reevaluate the official government position and judgment on the case in light of new evidence and new information that's brought together.
In your opinion, what is the most compelling case for the existence of ETs in modern time?
Oh, that's a really hard question. I can't think of any one. I'm sure I probably will before the show ends, but I always was interested from very early on in it, as I mentioned with this case in Vandenberg. I think military radar visual cases are some of the most compelling because I don't care what someone describes, it's still subjective, right? Yeah. It's a subjective observation, a subjective interpretation of that observation. And if anything I've learned in 34 years, human eyewitness testimony cannot be relied on and 10%.
No.
But I don't go to the extreme the skeptics do, where if you have 200 people that all describe the same thing, the skeptics will say, well, but we're a pattern-seeking type
Sure.
of primate, and our brains are looking for pattern. Okay, if you have 200 people all describing the same thing, you can't just discount that entirely. But
David?
obviously, the skeptics do.
David, here's something you won't hear from a skeptic. We've got to take a commercial break now, so please stand by. Exo Nation, you're listening to us right here from our studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. David Marler and I return to wrap up this first hour tonight as the X Zone continues. UFOs, a hot topic. Don't go away. And welcome back. Our guest this hour, David Marler. He's with the National UFO Historical Records Center, and their website is www.nufohrc.org, and they're located in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. First of all, Dave, as I said to you during this past break, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. I really appreciate the hard work and the dedication that you and the other members of the National UFO Historical Records Center do. And I love what your mission is. To, you guys are the historians and the archivists of the UFO world.
Yes, we're trying to preserve the history. And, when you think of UFOs, Rob, it's so ethereal, right? You can't grab a UFO, you can't touch a UFO. But again, echoing words of Barry Greenwood, one of my dear friends and colleagues in our group, he always says that what we have, the history, the books, the journals, the newsletters, the government documents, etc., the audio recordings, he says, this is the physical manifestation of the UFO phenomenon. This is something you can come and see, you can touch, you can learn from. And so we're trying to preserve those elements. Admittedly, just like any field, unfortunately, the UFO field, has its share of charlatans and con artists,
Sure,
and people that are out there muddying the waters. And again, if you want to say my religion is history, you can say that, because it's very near and dear to my heart. If you're going to speak about something, you should be accurate in speaking about it. And there's nothing better than to have the original contemporaneous documents, the original case files. In fact, some of your audience may think of some famous UFO cases they've heard about. More often than not, we have the original handwritten UFO report forms from those witnesses and from some famous UFO investigators. And sometimes people will argue with me, well, no, wasn't that seen on this date? It's like, no, trust me. I have the original report from 1952. So it's always good when you can go back and use that as kind of a touch base point. And so, and again, it's not just documents, but it's audio, it's video, it's film, it's photographs. And the one thing that I've learned as we amass all of this data is there's a lot of information out there. Quite often you hear the same 10 or 12 cases discussed, rehashed. There are literally thousands, tens of thousands of case files that we have here of cases that most people haven't heard about. And so that's why we're emboldened to try to not only centralize, preserve the documents, but digitize them and make it available to a much wider audience.
How often do you come across the reports, the original reports that you people have, and compare it to media reports of the day? They must be day and night.
In some cases, it could be almost two completely separate stories. It's just amazing. And, some people, again, if you're not a historian, some of the details may not matter. But sometimes, to your point, Rob, there is gross creative license taken by journalists. I use the term loosely in some cases, and commentators, where they just grossly misrepresent these cases. And more importantly, and this is something we don't often talk about, Rob, misrepresent the people that had the courage to come forward to say, I'm not saying it's alien, I'm not saying it's extraterrestrial, but I saw something and I felt duty bound to report it. And especially, during Project Blue Book, many of these individuals felt it was their duty to report it to the Air Force, who was collecting these reports. Again, going back to, the 1940s and 50s and 60s, I mean, during the Cold War, when they were investigating these, we didn't know what they were. Were they Soviet? Were they actual aliens? We didn't know. And it's interesting, too, because we're talking about the history. We're also talking about what's gone on recently within Congress with the congressional hearings. History repeats itself. When the Air Force, or the Army Air Force, going back before they formed as a separate military group in September of 47, when they first got into this, they weren't out to prove that UFOs were alien. Quite the contrary. Kenneth Arnold, his famous sighting near Mount Rainier up in Washington State, not very far from the Bering Strait. It wasn't a gross extrapolation to think, well, could these be some type of advanced aircraft that the Soviets, they're making incursions into our airspace? And so they went into it looking at this as a potential threat to national security. Fast forward in time, look where we are now with the United States government. One of the things that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has issued in the last 3 reports in the last 3 consecutive years, UFOs could be a potential threat to national security and, at the very least, pose a threat to air safety. And so here we are again with the government looking at it through the lens of national security. And I say rightly so. If we have unknown objects that are here, we don't know where they're from, we don't know what their intent is, they appear to be flying rings around our most advanced aircraft, how can we not be looking at this? How can we not be collecting this data? And I would say that about the United States government, the Canadian government, any government of the world. If you can't secure your own airspace, then you don't have a controlled airspace. Take controlled out of the equation. You just have airspace. And so I think from a very pragmatic standpoint, we need to continue to look at these UFOs, whatever they are, and try to ascertain what they are and how they operate.
Has there been another government from another country who's come to you and your organization for assistance on doing research on their UFO sightings?
Not government agencies, but we have had a number of people. Again, I mentioned South American countries. We have a number of South American researchers, one in Brazil who recently reached out, who asked for some information, but also is looking to donate his files. So even though we're based here in the United States, we've had people wanting to send their files. And in fact, my dear friend Philip Mantle from the UK, he lives in Yorkshire, England. He, in March of last year, shipped a pallet of British UFO files and materials that he had amassed over 50 years. And so even though we're not advertising worldwide, people see the value in preserving the material, and they feel, again, duty bound to try to get that material somewhere where it's going to be safe, where it's going to be preserved, but more importantly, so it can be accessible. Because, there are people that collect and hoard data. There's a difference between a storage unit and an active archive, and we want to be an active archive.
Where do you see the future of your organization, the National UFO Historical Records Center, being? What are your plans for the future?
Well, not to sound presumptuous, but I think it really falls along the lines of what you were just discussing earlier in the show, that I think people are going to appreciate, especially once we move into this new building, which, by the way, I have a meeting this week. We may be offered a building to expand our efforts. So I'm really excited about that. I'll have to keep you posted on that, Rob.
Please do.
But once we do that and people can truly see all of the material brought together in a much more relaxed atmosphere where people can come in more readily and access the materials, I think that government officials are going to be interested. I plan on reaching out to Senator Martin Heinrich, who sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee looking at the UFO or UAP subject. He's right here in New Mexico. I have local government officials I'm working with who know him. We're looking to bring him in and let him see the literally vast quantity of materials we have, and see if we can be part of the dialogue, as you mentioned, where Congress will at least be willing to ask us questions. Because I guarantee that the episode that I described earlier in the show, where someone thought they had top secret Air Force photos, other episodes, other instances are going to occur like that unless you have someone that can be here to provide a sniff test for these things. And I remarked to the individual afterwards, and I remarked to Chris Mellon, use us as a sniff test. I don't need to know sources and methods, but all you have to do is, for an example, Rob, say Cincinnati, Ohio, September 2nd, 1959. Does that mean anything to you? Do you have anything around that date? We don't need to know the details of the information that they're trying to vet, but just simply give us information like that that's not classified, that's not divulging sources and methods, and we can come back and say, you know what? Yes, we have a case file on that. We'll scan it. We'll send it to you.
You've got a lot of work ahead of you, my friend, and I sincerely appreciate all your hard work. Now, if people have what they consider to be legitimate UFO reports from way back when, how can they, should they contact you? Should they send them to you? Or?
Yeah, you've mentioned the website several times, www.nufohrc.org. If they go there, they can send us an email message. We've had a few collections, smaller collections that have come in through people reaching out through the website. But certainly, we would welcome that. We have a collection from my dear friend Lee Spiegel, who passed away in August of last year. We have 60 boxes of his case files and audio recordings of interviews he did over a 50-plus year period of time. That information will be ready to ship out within the next month, coming out here to Albuquerque. And we have a number of other large collections coming in as well from some relatively big-name researchers. And so it's interesting because we're afforded the opportunity of having the case files from these early UFO organizations for the first time in history under one roof. And they were working in a siloed manner where NICAP was over here, APRO was over here, Center for UFO Studies was over there. But what we're now starting to do, Rob, is see they had, in some cases, case files regarding the same instance, but in some cases, one organization had a piece of the puzzle that the other didn't, and vice versa. So again, as I mentioned earlier, despite the fact these are old cases, in some cases going back decades, we're starting to get new insights that we never had before.
It sounds like you're doing what we in law enforcement used to do, or still do. I'm no longer in the force, but we used to exchange information, to solve problems, to solve puzzles, riddles, to solve crimes. And
Absolutely.
It's so nice to see that this is happening within the UFO community. Now,
Well,
if other people in other paranormal situations like Bigfoot, ghosts, and so on would use your template, man, we'd be a lot further ahead than we are right now.
Absolutely. I view all these cases and sighting reports as data points. And the more data points we have, if in fact we're dealing with an intelligence behind some of these things, there must be patterns. And it's just a matter of us trying to identify those patterns. Now, what's really exciting is I mentioned that we're digitizing all this material. We have been contacted by some private individuals and groups that would love, once we have all the material digitized, to let them utilize AI technology to crunch the data. And
David, I
think,
hate to do this, my friend, but we've run out of time for tonight. Please come back again, please.
Absolutely.
And let our listeners know how they can get a hold of you one more time.
Absolutely. Our website, www.nufohrc.org.
David Marler from everyone here at the X Zone and listening around the world on the classic1220.ca stream. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And thank you and everybody there for the great work that they're doing.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate it.
Good night, David. All right, X Zone Nation, I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue from our broadcast center here in St. Catharines, Ontario. And you're listening to us on your hometown radio, Classic 1220 and classic1220.ca.
We've drawn the